International Press View today, but it's because we're talking about the US primaries, tackling them. Elena is with us as ever, of course, here on set, and also here's Paul Valle, who's Professor of Political Science at Sciences Po University. Thanks for coming in. Just in case you have missed it, Rick Santorum has won both primaries in Alabama and Mississippi. Elena, what are the papers saying about it?
Well, why can't Romney do better in the South? That's what the New York Times is asking. They've got a few potential reasons, that his millionaire image and his association with the East Coast and with extremely wealthy friends, and the fact what we know about his own income just doesn't play well with working class voters down in the South who find it hard to get to the end of the month, and they don't believe that Romney really understands their problems. There was a poll taken asking them, firstly, who do you think is the best candidate to beat Obama? Most of them picked Romney on those grounds, but then when asked who are you going to vote for, the same people picked Santorum because they thought he could understand them better effectively. Then there's social issues. Obviously, Santorum and Gingrich have been attacking Romney on the grounds that he's changed his views on these things, that he once supported abortion rights, that he once supported a healthcare plan in Massachusetts that's similar to Obama's. And those points have gone down home with those voters in the South because lots of them told the New York Times reporters they brought those things up. They said he changes his mind all the time. So what then does this mean for the rest of the race? That's what the Daily Beast is asking. Firstly, can Santorum actually win? Well, in terms of delegate count, it's still going to be very hard for him to get back Romney's lead that he already has. They point that out. But they do say he's got all the media attention, so he can now paint himself as the only conservative alternative to Romney, putting more pressure, of course, on Newt Gingrich to pull out.
So Paul Valle from Sciences Po, thanks for coming in and talking to us today. As Elena said, there does seem to be a big split, isn't there? And if Romney can't do well in the South, it kind of shows that big difference in the Republican vote.
Yes, well, actually, one also saw in yesterday's Herald Tribune, they quoted one of the voters going to the polling stations, and his ideal candidate was actually a mix of the three, with the interesting fact that the only thing that Mitt Romney was meant to contribute to this ideal Republican candidate was his looks. So that really seemed that as far as those electors were concerned, there was a problem of message and content. However, one wants again to look at these two southern states as being just only part of what is needed to win a final election. 7 out of 10 voters there were white and also described as religiously fundamentalist. And so certainly it does create a problem because Mitt Romney can break into that kind of electorate. At the same time, there's also an attempt by his campaign to minimize the losses there, in part because those two states were holding proportional elections. So in terms of delegates, indeed, the Gingrich and the Santorum campaign are still very far behind Romney's count.
This does narrow the race, though, doesn't it, Maud? Looking like it's just between Santorum and Romney. Should Gingrich just pull out?
Well, that's what some feel is going to be the result of this, because indeed Gingrich was the local son, so to speak, and so it was for him to prove that he could actually win a resounding victory in the South. So in terms also, of course, of a spending now, it's probably means that the donors for the ultra-conservative camp are really going to put pressure on just one single candidate, and they really do hope that it will then actually exercise a maximum pressure at the time of the convention. And certainly the onus is going to be on Romney to pick a running mate who's acceptable to that kind of electorate.
Paul, thanks very much for coming in. Elena is also still with us for the rest of the headlines as well. What are the papers saying about other stories?
Briefly, let's talk about Syria. Russia, why should we stop sending arms to Syria? That's the headline at The Independent. The paper says that's what the defence minister said yesterday. They say they don't say there's any reason why they shouldn't honour arms contracts they still have to Syria. On the inside in the paper, they've got a double page talking about just how well armed the Bashar al-Assad's army already is. And it's already a pretty substantial arsenal that they're talking about in there. 4,000 tanks, 90 armed helicopters, 600 planes. They've got a lot of weapons, as you can see there. There's also some quite horrifying extracts from a report that's due to be published today by Amnesty International in that piece, accounts of what the paper calls calls an orgy of torture, people who've been raped and forced to see their family members tortured and things like that. So we've got increasingly more and more horrifying reports coming out of Syria that are mentioned in that paper. Does that then mean that we should intervene, is what, of course, analysts then ask. I've looked at the Moscow Times because we're talking about Russia, and there's actually an interesting piece in there by a man who was an advisor to Bill Clinton, who effectively sort of backs up Putin's position, comparing Syria to Libya and saying, actually, because Libya now seems to be fractioning regionally, there's sectarian tension there, there's ongoing violence, the intervention there, according to him, has failed, and that shows we shouldn't try and repeat it in Syria. A controversial position, considering how awful some of the stories coming out of there are.
Very briefly, just got time to look at some media news from the UK.
Yes, just briefly, Rebecca Brooks arrested again yesterday, along with husband, as we can see on the front page of The Guardian. Now, inside the paper, they ask, interestingly, if any possible trial that she might eventually face has been so prejudiced, she just can't have a fair trial now. We've had so much evidence of this coming out of the judge-led public Leveson inquiry. If she ever does end up in a dock, they ask, could any jury give her a fair and reasonable trial, when we've all heard so much from tabloid reporters defending their journalism to all kinds of horrifying stories from celebrities and crime victims from the hacking they suffered.
Elena, thanks very much. Paul as well, thanks very much for coming in. That's the international papers here on France 24.